Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Top Tips for Blocking Pwned Passwords in Your Organization, sponsored by Specops. Before we begin, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. On the right-hand side of your screen is the Q&A. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can type them into the Q&A box and submit them to our speakers. All questions will be saved, so if we don't get to answer you, we may follow up via email. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets you can use. If you have any technical difficulties, please click on the yellow Help widget. Here you can find answers to common questions. A copy of today's slide deck is available for download in the green Resource List widget, as well as some other PDFs for you. Towards the end of today's presentation, we will ask for your feedback. A survey will pop open on your screen, and it will only take 1 minute to complete. Your feedback is extremely helpful. An on-demand version of the webcast will be available 1 day after the event and can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier today. I would now like to turn the event over to Security Now's independent security expert analyst, Dan Reese. Dan?
Great. Thank you very much, and welcome, everyone. So I'm going to be, as mentioned, the moderator for this, and then Darren James with Specops will be going into the details of their products and different information that is really critical to being able to secure your environment by the use of good passwords that you can utilize to protect exactly what's going on within your environment, to be able to ensure that people can't break a password and get in, because once they do that, you've got a lot of issues that you have to deal with. So the question becomes, really, what is a password? Because everybody, hears the term, and we all have to use passwords in every different area that we have to get into an electronic system, to be able to go to our banking, email, things like that, social media, so on and so forth. But they're actually very simple from a conceptual standpoint. And basically what they are is a secret string of characters that end up being shared between parties, and it's used to confirm one of the participants or both participants' identity. Now, when you're talking about that in the digital world, that means obviously there's a system that understands the password that you put in to be able to then give you permission to go into your email, as I mentioned, your financial account, things like that. And basically, most passwords are made up of multiple alphanumeric characters that are going to be arranged in a preset order. In other words, you have, whatever structure you have of your particular password. You could have the, and don't use this, by the way, the term password 1, 2, 3, 4. That's alphanumeric. You could have uppercase, lowercase, things like that to make it more complex. Although I have to say the password 1, 2, 3, 4 with uppercase, lowercase can be broken in a matter of seconds. So, and the thing that's nice about passwords is there's a tremendous amount of history. They've been used by organizations and such for literally thousands of years. These could have been passwords that were used to be able to code a message between armies, things like that, or between governments, whatever the case may be, so that only certain people could read the information that they wanted to transpire between the two parties. What's interesting is that passwords saw their advent into the computing world in around 1961, when the first password was utilized by a professor at MIT to be able to get into a system. So here's the question: are passwords important? And the answer is yes, they're absolutely critical. The fact of the matter is that the passwords are a first line of defense against hackers. If you have a weak password and you use that password across a whole bunch of systems, very likely it can be easily broken once it's discovered by a hacker, and then they can get into all your systems through that password if we use it. What's interesting about this is that it is also a very highly targeted area, because hackers know that it's a fairly straightforward way to be able to gain initial entry into accounts, because a lot of people don't understand the necessity to really use complex passwords. And so that's part of what we're going to be talking about in this presentation. And also what happens is, I'm sure you're faced with this, that you got 40 accounts or 10 accounts or whatever it might be where you have to use a password. And how do you keep track of all the different passwords that you have to use for each one? And they each have different rules for the password that you need to use to get into that account. So what happens, what a lot of people end up defaulting to is they end up using the same password between both public, for example, their personal email, if they have a Facebook account, any kind of social media account, and private, which would be a work email, their financial accounts, for example, healthcare, to get into your healthcare records from your doctor and stuff like that, or other corporate network systems. So they end up tending to use the same thing across the board. And what that means is that there's a high level of exposure to those passwords for somebody to be able to, break, have access to and break that password. And if you're using the same one across all of those various areas, then that means they can go from your public area where they've broken your password and now get into all your private as well. And part of the aspect here is education. And of course, what's happening here is with the complexity is that we're told, for example, by standards out of different systems, what a complex password is. So everybody thinks, okay, I got to use a complex password. So it has a set of criteria as to what that complex password should look like, such as I mentioned, X number of characters, alphanumeric characters, a combination of uppercase, lowercase, and numbers. Well, what's interesting, if you follow that scheme, password 1234 with a capital P actually meets that. And that, as I mentioned, is a password that can be broken in a matter of seconds by any good system. So what really has to come about to help users to do the job of utilizing and applying good passwords are systems that can help them do that. That would help, track and make sure they're using actually complex passwords to ensure that their security can continue to meet the levels that it needs to meet to protect their information, to protect their systems, and to protect themselves. So it's interesting when you look at the aspect of the different techniques that organizations, hackers and such use. And by the way, hackers are often part of nefarious organizations that can apply a lot of computing power to be able to break passwords, write applications and things like that, to be able to do things such as attack a password so that they can break it. For example, there's the Ohio State University has a list of password attack techniques that these guys use. Yeah, for example, in the common one, this is where an attacker runs a test against commonly used passwords. As I mentioned, password, QWERTY, 12345, things such as a user's name, their birth date, pet names, the street that they live on, all kinds of things like that. It's very easy for them to be able to do that and to then discover what the password is, and then they're off on creating kind of situations where you're not going to be very happy because all of a sudden now you've been compromised. They can also use dictionary attacks, which is basically what they do is they take, for example, an English dictionary, which has about 120,000 words in it, and they apply every word in the dictionary. They can also apply combination of those words, and then we start getting into what's called a hybrid attack, which combines a dictionary attack, common attack for common words that might not necessarily, such as your name or common terms and stuff like that, street name. They add unique characters, the uppercase, lowercase, your exclamation mark, question mark, things like that into it. What's interesting is using a standard computer. This is not some super powerful computer that a hacker may have access to, but just a regular desktop. You can break a password that follows all of those characteristics, has words from a dictionary, usernames, street names, and things like that, uppercase, lowercase. It can break it in like less than 30 hours. So then you also have other attack techniques such as a mask, which is, again, a combination of common, dictionary, hybrid, that also will make assumptions about the password length. So, for example, as I mentioned, you have different standards that are out there in the industry that say that you have to have a password that is 9 or 10 characters length. So they can actually say, okay, we're going to attack passwords. It's going to be this long. It's going to have X number of alphabetic characters, such as password itself, and then it's going to have X number of numbers, and it may have a couple of special characters. So they can actually put that in to a system that will then test all of those against the password until it breaks it. So, that also, with the amount of computing power that they can apply to this, also is able to break, a lot of passwords within a fairly short period of time. And then you have a thing called a brute force, this is where they just take everything, throw it at the password. They've got plenty of time, they've got plenty of computing resources, and they go ahead and break it. They're not making any assumptions about what the password may look like, characters it may use, things like that. Again, what we have here is organizations that have a tremendous amount of computing power, which means that we as users need to be able to recognize the things that we need to do to be able to ensure that our passwords are as protected and as safe and as robust as possible. The last kind of attack is called a hash attack, which is where they'll steal password hashes. Because what happens is when anybody logs into a system, the system has what's called a hash, or a mechanism for basically representing that password that then they can compare to the password that they have stored, which verifies that it's real. And so what hackers will do is they'll go to those servers and they'll download those hashes, and then they'll start brute forcing those hashes to try and break them. And if they're not, past a certain number of character counts that Darren will get into, such as 15 and beyond of characters, alphanumeric characters, special case, characters and things like that, phrases and such, then the ability for them to break that is just a matter of computing time. So what I also have on this slide is some examples of how long it takes for a standard computer. This is the desktop that you can go down to your Best Buy or whatever happens to be the store that you buy a computer at, or getting it online, just a laptop, stuff like that, can take to break, for example, a 3-character password. If it uses all characters, that's alphanumeric, uppercase, lowercase, special characters, you're looking at less than a second. 6 characters, again, with a standard computer, a couple of days. So what we need to be aware of is the fact that if we're not, utilizing a robust technique to create robust password phrases and things like that, then we're basically exposing ourselves to being hacked. So to get into a little more details on that, I want to introduce Darren James. He's a product specialist with Specops and a technical lead, and he's going to walk you down through the aspect of what, some of the things that they offer and their capabilities. Darren, it's all yours.
Thanks very much, Dan. Good afternoon or good morning, everybody. I'm based over in the UK, so forgive my lack of knowledge of your time zone. So, I'm Darren James. I've got 20+ years experience in Active Directory and security. I've worked for Specops for the last 10 years, and it's kind of my passion in life is trying to get preach the gospel of setting good passwords. So I've been able to do that for the last 10 years, and hopefully I'll be able to give you a little bit of an insight into that today. So Specops, just a little bit about us. We're a privately owned company. We're based out of Stockholm in Sweden, but we have offices in the UK, the US, Canada, and it says and soon Germany. Well, now we have a German office as well. So we're pretty much spread all over the Western world. We have customers all over the world, 50 countries, more than 5,000 customers, and we specialize in password management and desktop management solutions. In fact, Specops, we're a group policy company, so everything that we do revolves around enhancing Microsoft's group policy and making it do things that it wouldn't normally do. So whether that's deploying applications or operating systems or setting really good password policies, that's kind of what we do. So back to this issue that we've got. So are passwords putting you at risk? Well, yes, of course they are. As Dan's just been saying, unfortunately, various companies out there, it doesn't need to be you, but it could be anybody on the internet, any system that requires a user to enter a password. If they get attacked and their username and password database is breached, then unfortunately users often reuse those passwords. So if you make them set a password at work, unfortunately a lot of users will use that same password for their banking account or their Gmail account or their Outlook.com account or their Dunkin' Donuts account or their supermarket account. They'll use exactly the same password. So that username and password pair could be out and exposed on the wild. And of course, if somebody gets their password hacked, all of those other publicly facing services, especially these days when you've got a proliferation of Office 365 and cloud-based systems, you can guarantee that a hacker will try that username and password pair against many, many other systems to see if that password and username has been reused. Users, unfortunately, are our weakest link. So we've just been talking about it, or I've just mentioned it there. Users will reuse passwords. They'll also, write them down with the old-fashioned rules of having a 3 out of the 5 character types mustn't contain your username. All of those standard rules that we see in standard Active Directory. People often resort into writing their passwords down, or sharing them with other colleagues, or sharing them with family members, or whatever it might be. The user is our weakest link. So common bad password habits. Well, password reuse, password sharing, the use of default, weak, or compromised passwords. So, password 1 with a capital P, summer 2019 ! Let me in, welcome 1. All of those things are really bad passwords. But of course, again, hackers, if they're going to have a targeted attack against your organization, they won't just be using those words. They'll be looking at your About Us page on your public-facing internet and then picking up keywords that relate to your organization, maybe where your locations are, the names of the streets where your offices are, the towns where your offices are, the local sports teams. All of those sorts of words should be considered weak within your own personal organization. So we need to find ways of blocking those words. And if you've ever had a pen test, or you plan to have an internal password audit done, if you get a third-party company in to do that and they're worth their salt, they're exactly the sort of words that they'll be using to do those attacks that Dan mentioned earlier, those hybrid attacks and rainbow table attacks. They'll be using words that relate to your business. And often these complex passwords that we've been living with for the past 20 years, they give users a bit of a false sense of security. Oh, look, I've got 11, 12, 13, 14 characters in my password. I must be safe. But there are some fundamental flaws in Active Directory which actually mean that anything less than 15 characters in a password is very, very weak. Within Active Directory itself, anything less than 14 or anything less than 15 characters is stored in a very well-known hash called an LM hash. And that hash file or that hash can be cracked very easily. So unless you've got strong physical security of your domain controllers and the backup tapes, remember, it's important to try and guide your users into using longer passwords and hopefully passphrases. And this is where NIST and the NCSC, so NIST is the US National Institute of Standards, and NCSC is the National Cyber Security Centre in the UK, along with Microsoft and a few other bodies, about 3 years ago, came up with some new advice around what makes a good password or a passphrase. So, and sort of the key points to that advice were making sure that you're using a password that hasn't previously been breached. Try to adopt the use of passphrases, so go over that 15-character limit where possible. Make use of multi-factor authentication wherever you can. So, and sure, you can use some things like, text messages and secret questions and things like that to provide us another factor of authentication. But ideally, you should be using more modern factors. So things like Google Authenticator and Touch ID and Face ID on your iPhone, or Google Fingerprint on your Android devices. Those sorts of things that provide stronger factors of authentication, almost multi-factor within one system. Something like Touch ID is something you have, your phone, something your passcode or your fingerprint to unlock your phone in the first place, and then your face, something you are, your face or your fingerprint itself. And also, some of their advice was to move away from enforcing complexity in passwords, because that kind of has a negative effect on security. People will end up, if you tell them to write a 15 or a 20 character passphrase with uppercase, lowercase, specials, and numbers in it, people will write that down. So instead, remove the complexity, go for length instead, but try to encourage users to use a structured method of coming up with that 20 character passphrase. Don't tell them to come up with a 20 character word, but tell them to come up with maybe 3 words that mean something to them that have at least 5 or 6 characters in them, and maybe separate them by spaces or dots or dashes or whatever it might be. And that will soon enough give you a 20 character passphrase and should be something fairly easy to remember. But what they shouldn't do is use like famous quotes or lines from a song. So "May the Force be with you" is a great phrase. You might think that's an amazing passphrase, but it's not. It's already been leaked. "We all live on the yellow submarine," already been leaked. "We'll fight them on the beaches," already been leaked. So come up with 3 random words that aren't a sentence, aren't a phrase, that a well-known phrase, but words that mean something to you but nothing to anybody else. That would be a good passphrase. And of course, the key thing is to educate users. So we want to get this message across. So we can enforce these rules at the top in our domain on our Active Directory, but things about password reuse and writing them down and sharing them with colleagues or friends or family, all of that can only really be done with education. So that should lead any kind of protection that you put in place within your organization. Should always be around educating users as to password best practice and hygiene. Block weak passwords. So yes, block those words that relate to your business, but also block any passwords that have previously been leaked. And that's easier said than done, because there are billions of passwords that have been leaked over the recent years, since 1961, when MIT first started using them. There's also some drivers as well from the NCSC and NIST about telling users or telling organizations never to expire passwords anymore. So the theory behind that is that if you've got an amazingly strong password or passphrase, it's never been leaked before, then you could theoretically let your users run with that password forever. We think that's quite dangerous information, though, or quite dangerous advice. Because one, not every user is born equal. You should be able to have different password policies and password expiries applying to different roles within your organization. Remember, you've got admins that have access to everything. You have HR staff that have access to personal information about your users. And you have the cleaner that might log in once a month to pick up their payslip. They all have access to different levels of information. So first of all, you want to make sure you put the right rules on the right roles within your organization. But also, with regards to expiry per se, you really can only set that password never expire if you've got an ability to detect an unusual login from, an unusual successful login. It's fine detecting failed logins. Active Directory with an account lockout policy will do that for you, but you want to look for an unusual successful login from an unknown device or an unknown location. That's what the only real time that you can put in the expiry, and never expire. Other than that, if you don't have that kind of solution available to you, then you should always have some sort of expiry, but base it on the level of access that account has. And yes, we've already talked about it. 2-factor is always better than 1-factor, and with that 1-factor being the password. So always try and have a second factor of authentication where you can. I know that's not possible across every system. It is becoming more common, but for the moment we're stuck with passwords for the majority of our systems, certainly for our Active Directories. So we need to try and make those passwords as good as we can. So how can we help? How can Specops help? Well, Specops has a number of password-related tools. First of all, we have a free tool, which I'm going to show you a little bit in a couple of slides' time, called Specops Password Auditor. This is a really nice free reporting tool that you can run inside your organization, and it can scan your existing passwords that your users have and tell you which or how many users in your environment have got compromised passwords. That's what the free version does. If you buy our software, you can actually unlock it so that it will tell you the usernames of all the people that are running compromised passwords. It'll even give you other information like duplicate passwords, or if anybody's got a blank password set. But it's an invaluable tool for checking the health of your organization or the health of your Active Directory. Secondly, there's something called Specops Password Policy. So this enables you to enforce these different policies within your organization. So you can now enforce a passphrase rule, and you can define what a passphrase means to your organization. Not that it's just 20 characters, that it is 3 words made of 6 characters with spaces, or whatever your definition might be. You can also block things like incremental passwords. So people, when their passwords expire, they often go from password 1 to password 2, password 3, password 4. We can stop that behavior in its tracks. We can also enforce variable length password aging as well. So, let's face it, not everybody is going to be great at typing a 15 or a 20 character passphrase. We all know someone in our organization, or our family maybe, that's one of these one finger typists. So if I ask my dad to type in a 20 character passphrase, he's going to get to character sort of 6 or 7, forget what he's previously typed, delete it all, lock himself out half a dozen times. So, they don't always suit everybody. But so what we can do is we can have this variable length password aging, which will allow people with shorter passwords to keep them, say, for 30 days or 45 days or whatever you want to set it to. But if they get to that magic 15 characters, well, then we can let them keep it for a year. So we can reward the user for going that extra mile and coming up with a 15-character passphrase. But we can also block if they try to just pad out their existing password. So if they type in password 111111 to get up to 15, we can block 3 or more consecutive identical characters as well. So as it says here, enforce smarter password policies. That's exactly what we can do. As well as, obviously, against we have all of the dictionaries, the custom dictionaries available as well, so you can block any words that relate to your organization. And then a nice add-on to password policy is Specops Password Blacklist. So from the title of this presentation, the Pwned Passwords, maybe some of you have heard of a website called Have I Been Pwned? It's run by an individual called Troy Hunt. We're not affiliated to him at all, but he had a really good idea in that he came up with a database of 555 million leaked passwords that you can go and query, so you can test your password against that database. What Password Blacklist, or Specops Password Blacklist, does is it allows you to block just over 1 billion unique leaked passwords in your environment, because handling that database is a massive undertaking for any IT organization. Troy's database on its own is 45 gigabytes in size, so managing that is a nightmare. So what we've decided to do with Blacklist is host the database for you. Now, we don't send your users passwords over the internet. We don't send out even a hash of your users' passwords over the internet. We do it in a very clever way. But using that system, you can make sure that your users aren't using any compromised passwords. Well, they get leaked every day, so maybe there might be a new one. But we also have a team of devs that monitor hacking news groups and forums continuously. And if they see any new password breaches appear on those systems, they will check to see if any of those new passwords aren't in our database, and if they're not, they will upload it. So it's almost kind of like an antivirus definition update we do. And so we're constantly keeping that database up to date. But at the minute, it's just over 1 billion unique passwords in there. And then finally, once we've got our strong passwords, once we've made sure that they're not on any compromised lists, we want to be able to let the users reset their own passwords. Because again, we want to take out that weakness where the service desk knows the user's password as well as the user. So having a self-service password reset solution in place, especially if you've got some of these enhanced complexity rules or enhanced passphrase rules in place in your Specops password policy, we want to be able to make it easy for your users to reset their passwords, and that's where UReset comes into place. And of course, we've just been preaching about MFA, where we use something called flexible multi-factor authentication in UReset, which does allow users to authenticate themselves via Touch ID, Face ID, Google Fingerprint, Duo, Semantic VIP, as well as the more traditional secret questions and answers and mobile codes if they must. But the push in that solution is to make people use the more modern factors of authentication. So now I'd like to show you just a quick demo of our Specops Password Auditor. This is a kind of a screenshot here, but I'm hoping screen sharing will work just fine. So just give it a few seconds to hit your screens. Fingers crossed. There we are. I think everyone can see it now. So this is Specops Password Auditor. It's an MSI that you can download from us. To do the scan against your Active Directory passwords, you need to run it as a domain admin account, but it doesn't need internet access as long as it's, we're not sending anything across the internet to Specops. It's just going to be running locally against a downloaded subset of our blacklist database. So I've already downloaded the files. This is a 4.6 gigabyte database that I've downloaded locally to this SBL folder on my desktop, and I can click Start Scanning. So what this does is it will go off to your Active Directory. It would extract all of the hashes of your users' passwords and then compare them with the hashes in the database. And when I show the results, we can see that in this particular environment, I have 66 compromised accounts in this environment. It won't tell me what the passwords are. It doesn't crack anybody's passwords, but it does tell you that those users are running compromised passwords. Now, this is the paid-for version that displays the name. In the free version, it just gives you this nice big red number at the top here, so it tells you how big the issue is. But in the paid-for version, you can actually see the individual users. And as I mentioned, it has some really other cool reports, like identical passwords. So I'm sure none of the admins that we have on the call today have never used the same password for their admin account or their regular user account. I can't hear any laughing at the back, so I'm guessing you've never done that. But if you thought that may occur, this can be very, very useful for picking and users that may use the same password across multiple accounts, even within the same Active Directory. And also things like blank passwords. So often organizations think to themselves, well, I've got a password policy in my environment. It doesn't allow blank passwords. Well, in Active Directory, a blank password is actually an attribute that you can give to somebody. It has nothing to do with password policy. So often when you're using things like identity lifecycle management products like FIM or MIM or any one of these systems that creates users for you and generates the initial password, there's sometimes a process in there that will generate a blank password at some point, and this will highlight those sorts of issues. We recently installed this at a customer site, and he had 35,000 users, and all 35,000 users could theoretically set a blank password. They didn't even realize it until they ran our tool. So yeah, they obviously then went and fixed it, but it can highlight some big issues within your environment as well. So really, really useful free tool. Other reports that it can give you, it can tell you all of the admin accounts in your environment. It can tell you when people's passwords are about to expire. You can drill into here, drag a little slider, and it will tell you whose passwords are about to expire in up to the next 60 days. It can also tell you whether you've got certain password policies that are NCSC or NIST or PCI compliant. We forgot to mention PCI is another standard that came out earlier. So if you have any users within your organization that process credit card payments, they may well have to comply with PCI. So these are all sort of important things to bear in mind. It'd be another group of users that may have a special password policy applying to them. So yes, I'd urge everybody to, we'll display the download link again for you at the end of this slide pack. So you're more than welcome to download a copy of this, run it in your environment, and if you have anything to discuss with us, obviously on a one-to-one basis, you don't have to do it here and now, but if you want a private meeting with anyone from Specops, we're more than happy to show you this or as a demo, but also help you set it up inside your environment as well. That's absolutely doable. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing and pass on some questions, or allow you to ask any questions. Do we have anything that's come up yet? So we've got a couple of questions come through. Does Specops Password Auditor store any passwords in clear text? The answer to that is no. There are no passwords stored in our system at all. We've got a couple of questions come through. Oh, I can hear feedback of my own voice there. So no, we haven't got any. We don't store any passwords. We're still using Active Directory in the background. Now, you can sometimes store passwords with reversible encryption, but they are still encrypted, and they'll be heavily encrypted using the machine identities or the machine certificates on your domain controllers. But typically speaking, you only need that for certain rules. So if you don't need to use those rules, then you don't need to store anything even in reversibly encrypted. They're all properly hashed. But still bear in mind, though, that anything less than 14 characters may still be stored as a well-known hash within your Active Directory. So just be careful of that. I've got another question. Troy Hunt's Have I Been Pwned contains list of previous breaches as well. Why should we use yours? Well, that's a great question. I think I already covered it when I was doing the presentation. But Troy, fortunately, he set that up in the first place, which is great news. But unfortunately, he's just one guy, and he has to maintain that database in his own time. Also, it still involves you having to visit that website and type passwords in. Now, there are various, resources on GitHub and freeware out there that will write password filters for you that you can upload into your Active Directory and use. But I often say to people, writing a password filter that can process these sorts of databases isn't a trivial task. And relying on freeware, is that something that you really, in the support or lack of support that might go along with that freeware, is that really something that you want to expose your business to? You don't know what that DLL is doing, whether it's sending passwords out over the internet, whatever it might be doing. So I'd always encourage people to, whether it's our product or whether it's something else, but buy it from a professional source, or if you're capable of writing your own one, go for it. But most people aren't. As I say, it's not a trivial task. And of course, the great thing about our database as well is we're constantly updating it. I think Troy last updated his one back in July this year. We update ours on a daily basis. Wouldn't it be more secure? So the third question, wouldn't it be more secure to just use a password manager like LastPass? Yes, absolutely. If you can encourage your users to use LastPass or one of these password management solutions, we'd absolutely encourage that. The problem with LastPass and all of those other systems, all of those other solutions, is that you can't enforce users to use them, and they don't protect you from every single password. So often those systems are protected by your AD password, and if you don't have a good password policy in your Active Directory, then once they've got the keys to the kingdom, then away you go. So yes, absolutely, if you can get your users to use them, LastPass's password management solutions in general are good, but you still need a way to enforce that if possible, and you can't protect everything, which is the other issue. How would Azure AD work with Blacklist? Well, Azure AD isn't actually AD. It's a Microsoft LDAP server of some kind. We never get to actually see it. So it's called Azure AD by the marketing department of Microsoft, but it isn't actually Active Directory. There are a couple of group policies that you can use, but they're standard ones. They're fixed. You can't apply any custom policies. But typically when people ask me this question, they're talking about Office 365. Normally they're synchronizing their AD accounts and passwords from their on-prem Active Directory to Office 365. And of course that means your on-prem AD is still your master source of truth, if you like, for your password policies, because you're synchronizing those passwords up to Azure AD. So it will work extremely well in that sort of environment, because we're enforcing the password policy on AD, and then Azure AD Connect is then replicating that password up to Azure AD. Now, if you have native Azure AD accounts, we can't help you at that point. You're at the mercy of whatever Microsoft gives you in Azure AD. But if it's synchronized Active Directory accounts, which is probably 99.9% of the people that I speak to, then you're absolutely fine. When passwords are included as part of 2FA, can we relax on the password complexity requirements? Yes, providing you can guarantee that 2FA is always used. But that's a big guarantee. So I would probably say no. I would still encourage you to try and use passphrases. You don't have to have complexity, just as long as it's long. Strength equals length, I think someone coined a phrase once at one time. So if you can have a long password and again hit that magic number of 15 characters, then absolutely. It doesn't need to have capital letters, numbers, special characters, whatever in it. It could all be lowercase. But if we can hit 15, then I'd feel comfortable about letting people use it. But yeah, anything less, I'd be a bit nervous. If we enable blacklist, would users with blacklisted passwords be prompted to change their passwords right away? So again, this is up to you. It's a configuration item in password policy. So you can say to everybody, right, if your password's expired, or I want to expire everybody's password, they will need to change it straight away. However, most organizations don't want to do that. They don't want that big bang where 10,000 people are all upset at the same time in the morning. So normally the rollout procedure is we set up the password policies, we let the user's passwords naturally expire, and at that point we then check their passwords or their new password against the blacklist. However, if you were concerned, if you ran this tool, the password auditor tool inside your environment, and you identified a number of users, maybe with critical accounts that are running blacklisted passwords, then sure, maybe they'd be great candidates for your pilot of password policy within your environment, because you could affect those guys straight away. But certainly you don't want to hit everyone in your organization all on day one with blacklisted passwords. But it is possible if you want to go down that road. And then the last question that we've got here, will using blacklist cause usability issues? So that's an interesting question. First of all, usability as far as your domain controllers go, this is the whole point of having us host a database for you, because managing that 45 gig file is near enough impossible. If you were to load that 45 gig file as a custom database into password policy, that would mean that 45 gig file has to be loaded into memory, so read from disk and loaded into memory on all of your DCs. And I'm guessing, but I'm pretty sure that hardly any of you, if not any of you, have got sort of 50 plus gig of RAM assigned to your domain controllers. So that's the whole reason why we developed Password Blacklist, to take that issue away. But also, Blacklist comes in two forms. It comes in something called Blacklist Complete, which is this online check against the 1 billion passwords in their database. But it also comes in something called Blacklist Express as well, which is a local database that you can host on your DCs. The good news about the Blacklist Express database is that it's only 4.6 gigabytes in size, but it's not stored in memory. It's only stored on disk on your DC. So you're not going to cripple your domain controllers. You just need to make sure they have at least 4.6 gig of RAM. And the reason we give you this this shrunk down version of the database. It's not the full database, and it only gets updated every 6 months or so. But the nice thing about it is that we can check your users' passwords whether your internet is up or down. It doesn't matter. So your passwords are checked instantaneously as they're changed or reset against the Express database. If they passes that check, it's written to Active Directory, and in the background, the system will send not the user's password, not a hash of the user's password, but the first 4 characters of a bcrypt hash out to the blacklist database, and the blacklist will return around 20,000 records that begin hashes that begin with those first 4 characters. That will then be passed back to the domain controller that's processed the change. It will compare the full hash against the 20,000 that it's just received, and if it finds a match, it can then send an email and a text message out to the user to say the password that they've just been set isn't allowed and that they should change it the next time they log in. Now, we can force that password change, or we can just send them the warning. But this whole process has been pretty well thought through around not leaving users hanging while it's going to do checks. It lets all of that happen. There's no delay in the users resetting or changing their passwords, but we still do all of those checks comprehensively within the environment. So I think that's it for the questions. Dan, have you got anything to add?
No, I don't. Just as you mentioned, Darren, the free version is available. The next slide that you go to will have the
absolutely
links and stuff like that to it. And, as you also mentioned, you're available to answer other questions and help people out, with improving their password regimen.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we're more than happy to organize, private demonstrations with customers or anybody who's interested. There's no sort of commitment to buy or anything like that. If you want to see or get more details about anything that we've talked about today, please feel free to get in touch. And either myself or one of my colleagues will be happy to show you how the whole thing works and how you could use it in your environment. But it's a pretty cool solution.
Yeah, and also there is a survey that people can take at the end of the slides here that about what you thought of the information and stuff like that. We always like to gather information and make sure that we're providing people with the things that help them do their work and conduct their jobs and protect their systems and users and stuff like that. So appreciate the feedback on that.
Cool. Okay then. So I think that is the end of the presentation. Regan, do you need to do anything housekeeping wise, or are we good?
We're all set. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. And if everyone can just complete that survey, that would be great. And everyone, thanks for joining us again, and have a wonderful day.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time.